back to turning inward and being the good child. And when I married my husband, I was the good wife until I discovered autism. And I discovered that's me. That explains who I am. And then I fought for it. I went through the terrible twos at age 50 because now I had a sense of who I was and who I had the right to be. And yes, I demanded that. And I went from what my husband called a very easygoing, compliant person to a very self-directed, I had my own needs and wants, but he said he loved me all the more for it.
Hi, I'm Staci Neustadt. I am a speech-language pathologist and the CEO at Making Sense of Autism, and I'm a student of Susan.
And I'm Susan Golubock. I am a now retired occupational therapist who has worked many, many years after I discovered even my own autism with other autistic individuals. I founded Making Sense of Autism because of my passion to not only understand my brain and how it worked differently, but to try to explain what I've learned to other people so that they're more understanding and therefore more accepting and more accommodating to autistic individuals.
So our goal is to help you provide the right support without trying to fix autism, but by understanding it. So whether you're a parent, teacher, therapist, or just someone who wants to learn, you're in the right place. Be sure to subscribe and join us every week. We talk about a new topic. Sue, I work in early intervention, so birth to 3. And so we are constantly talking about the terrible 2s or the even worse 3s. And I'm always explaining to parents what it really is. And honestly, I really wish talking about reframing language, like if you missed our episode from last week, that's what we talked about. What if we reframed it from terrible 2s to learning autonomy, agency, self-awareness, because that's what's happening at that age. They're learning that they have a desire. They're learning that they have a voice to advocate for what they want. And I think the biggest barrier sometimes is us, right? We don't want our little babies to grow up, so we don't want them to do it on their own. But let's shift this to autistic individuals because I work with all levels of support, and level 3 or high support need autistic individuals, I find, often hit this stage at varying ages. Sometimes 5, sometimes 9, sometimes 18. But what is confusing to parents is that it is this stage, the terrible 2s, the autonomy, the agency. It's confusing because it looks like behavior. But what I consistently hear from parents is they've been so easy, they've been so good, and now all of a sudden, and I tell them, that is a red flag. Easy, so good is a red flag. No kid is easy or just good and compliant. Literally, if your child is that way right now, you should be concerned because nobody is like that. Or it's not healthy, right? Mm-hmm. Everyone has their own agency and autonomy, and it's important to build that for a gazillion reasons. Number one, safety, right? Like advocating so they're not taken advantage of, so they're not exploited. This has to develop. So Sue, from the autistic perspective, I know this is our foundation of our triangle of what has to happen sometimes, even before functional communication or other skills. Why is it so important that whether they're 2 or 12 or 22, why do we have to build autonomy and agency?
Well, every parent, when a child is born, the desires they have for them are to be happy and to be healthy and to be independent. I mean, that is their goal, is independence. They don't want a child to be, in as much as they would like to have their baby around forever, and grown children are still considered their babies. Um, they have to recognize that they can't have that child at age 32 still totally dependent on them. They need to work toward independence. And how do you get to be independent if you have no sense of self, if you don't fight for that independence? I was the good child, the good baby. And when we made a major move, yes, that was disruptive to me. And all of a sudden, my mother said, "What happened to that good child?" Yes, I was stressed, and I was expressing it through my behaviors, that I was stressed by making this move to a new house, to a new school. Um, all these things were new and stressful for me. And all she could see was, yes, the behavior, but not, and therefore I went back to being, turning inward and being the good child. And when I married my husband, I was the good wife until I discovered autism. And I discovered that's me. That explains who I am. And then I fought for it. I went through the terrible twos at age 50 because now I had a sense of who I was and who I had the right to be. And yes, I demanded that. And I went from what my husband called a very easygoing, compliant person to a very self-directed, I had my own needs and wants. But he said he loved me all the more for it. That's what people want. They don't want someone that's just totally dependent on them for the rest of their lives. They want somebody else that stands on their own 2 feet, that has some boundaries, that has limits, that they can't take advantage of because that person, they don't want someone that they can totally rule. At least most good people don't want that. Um, and so it is vital that every autistic individual be encouraged to discover who they are. And yet, what happens? Every parent thinking, well, I don't want them to feel different. Therefore, I'm going to treat them like they're like everybody else because I don't want them to feel different. Well, do you think that we as individuals don't know that we're different?
Exactly.
We can't see and perceive that we think differently. We seem to respond differently. We miss out on things everybody else seems to know. Um, and yet, if no one talks about it, if no one says, yeah, okay, yeah, you're different, but that's okay. Everybody is a little different. And if they don't point out the differences instead of always emphasizing, this is the rule, everybody acts like this is how you're supposed to act, this is how what you're supposed to say, everybody does the same thing, that's not helping them become and recognize themselves as individuals. And our special interests that we have are very intense interests. People just sort of, no, you have to have more diversity. You can't be so specialized. Why not?
Yeah.
If you would cater to what it is we do best and that we know in ourselves we are really good at, then we will have that drive to become independent and strive toward a career that uses those skills. And if you would encourage it, but people are constantly dismissing and discouraging in the guise of, well, you don't want to be different. You want to fit in.
Mhm.
Fitting in is what's important. Being like everyone else and doing what they do is important. And I get that from their perspective, but that's not helping us to be the person we need to be, which is independent.
And I think the biggest tension with this topic is, and we've talked about this before, polarities, where both things can be true, right? You can have agency and still get support or boundaries or whatever you want to call it. We're not saying Oh, they just get to do whatever they want to do. So they have the self-awareness. Because if you sit on either side of that, agency, self-awareness, or if either side, if you sit too much in either side, it becomes a weakness. But if you
Mhm.
balance both of, oh yeah, I see you want to choose how you put your shoes on, or you want to choose what clothes you're wearing. Okay, well, let's work on this together. What's appropriate for the weather today? Do you want to wear this or this? So you can balance choice, you can balance agency with those choices. But as you've mentioned a lot, autistics don't know they have choices, which is my favorite phrase to teach. What are my choices?
Absolutely. And without that, this is why they blame autistics for being rigid. Well, we pick up that compliance is good and independence is bad. Well, they
Yeah.
don't call it independence, but asserting yourself and being non-compliant is bad.
Mhm.
So we are taught to be rigid. We are not taught flexibility. We're not taught there's multiple choices and you have to weigh those choices and there's a balance in between them
Mhm.
that you can a compromise that you can find. um, we're not taught that way. We are taught here's the rules and you follow the rules, and then we become very good at rule following, and then they blame us for being too rigid.
Yeah. And I mean, that's really society as a whole, right? Compliance.
Huh?
You don't tell authority no. You don't refuse. And I think my biggest challenge too is we teach our kids to have that agency and advocate for themselves. And sometimes adults do see that as defiance or as being rude. But as we always teach, okay, here's a problem. So, you're supposed to do your homework. You're saying no. Uh-oh, we have a problem. You're refusing to do your homework, but we have to do your homework. So let's figure out what is the problem. Is it too hard? Is it whatever? So even when you see how, like, I'm still acknowledging that no, I'm not
Yeah.
going to accept that no because it's something we have to do, but I'm seeing it as communication, as a problem. And so even if it's like, no, I don't want to brush my teeth. Okay, I hear your no, but we have to brush our teeth or they're going to rot or we're going to lose our teeth and not have teeth. And so still acknowledging that is what is so important, acknowledging that agency. But this is where that balance comes in. You can acknowledge that self-awareness, acknowledge the agency, but if it's a have to, if it's a boundary, if it's, something that they have to do, coming up with some solution that works for both people. And again, that's another balance is problem solving so it works for both of you. If you just say no, and don't let them have that agency, they're eventually just going to give up and not have that agency, like you said, and just become people pleasers.
And that's where the whole issue of autism, the key issue is social connectedness.
Mm.
Um, and yet you're not teaching social connectedness when you have the authority rule and they are always wrong, different, not following the rules, trying to assert themselves as autistics, not as a typical person, but as a neurodivergent person. And if you don't recognize that, where is that social connect? You're not teaching us to connect to you as a person, as someone I can go to for help because you'll help me solve the problem. You're not going to tell me what to do. You're going to help me solve the problem. You're a person worth going to. Most autistics don't seek help. Even as a therapist, when I was working with my autistic clients, I would offer help and they would totally ignore me. If
Yeah.
they couldn't do it themselves, they would just give up wanting it, which is
Mhm.
what I did growing up. I just gave up wanting stuff rather than go to seek help. So didn't develop a need for other people, a social connection to other people.
Yeah. So many layers to this, but what we hope you take away today is if all of a sudden your child or student or client is demonstrating more of a strong will, that really is their desire for agency, their desire for autonomy. And so acknowledge that and provide choices, provide support or offer support, offer problem solving, and work with them and acknowledge that desire for agency instead of squashing it so they can help build their self-awareness.
And I have seen where this pervasive avoidance,
Yes.
demand for
Demand for
avoidance,
autonomy.
that is a demand for autonomy, and yet they label it
Yeah.
as a negative thing. And I've had autistics embrace that. Oh yes, this explains who I am. I am a I not demand for autonomy, but I am a demand avoidant person, and they label themselves that way. Oh yeah, that explains everything. You know, so how does that help them to recognize and become a positive person? They're embracing a negative image of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't help at all. Well, wonderful input, Sue. Thank you so much.
Thanks for asking, Staci.